I fostered 3 children through my stay so far. The first 2 were very young and didn't stay longer than several months before being reunited with their own families. Both were cases where the parents were convicted of a petty drug offense and had to straighten their lives out before they could have their kids back. There was no abuse reported from their caseworker. I met those parents and they seemed really like decent people that did love their children but made some bad choices and had to pay dearly for them. I was glad to see them reunited. The kids were ecstatic to be returned to their own mommies and daddies. It was heartwarming. And then I took in Marcy. I kept her for less than 1 week. Mrs. Dennis, the caseworker I dealt with, had warned me that Marcy's case was different than the others. Marcy's mother had an ongoing case for neglect and abuse. Mrs. Dennis said she was an alcoholic that confided to him once she never wanted Marcy and resented having to take care of her. On several visits, she had taken out her period to show Mr. Dennis and dotted lovingly on it while Marcy stood quietly in the corner. When Mrs. Dennis asked Marcy's mother why she didn't put Marcy up for adoption, she simply answered that no one would want her. A few days before I spoke with Mrs. Dennis about the placement, the agency received a call from the concerned neighbor that reported they thought the girl had been left alone. For 2 weeks, there had been no activity at the house, no one coming or going, no lights on at night. Marcy's mother's car was still there, but the house seemed deserted, and with the mother's history of neglect, the neighbor asked if they could do a well check. When Mrs. Dennis arrived, escorted by 2 police officers, it seemed like Marcy's mother had indeed left. She was gone, as was her beloved parrot, and the house was in complete disarray. The utilities had been turned off, the stench was overpowering. They found Marcy curled up sleeping in the filthy bathtub, surrounded by her own feces. They surmised she had been drinking the toilet water, and that's why she had gone to the bathroom on the floor. Marcy had neither a blanket or pillow in the tub with her, but she was covered in what seemed to be bird feathers. Mrs. Dennis said it was the saddest thing he ever saw. They didn't know what she had eaten, as there was no food in the cabinets, and what little food that had been in the fridge had spoiled. The police reported to find a large kitchen knife on the counter that seemed to have been smeared with a substance that resembled dried blood, and they would run some tests on it, but it would take a while to get the results. They searched the premise and found no sign of Marcy's mother. When Mr. Dennis brought Marcy to me, he filled me in on a few more details about her. She didn't speak much at all. She was 9 years old, but had the vocabulary of a 2-year-old. She could only say a limited amount of words, basically things like no, potty, and drink, to let you know when she needed something. He also warned me that she did not react well to public places. She suffered panic attacks when placed around too many people at once, more than likely a side effect of never leaving her own home. She was very thin and honestly not the cutest kid I've ever seen. My first 2 days with Marcy were uneventful. I worked from home and scheduled my own hours, so I was able to dedicate a lot of time to making Marcy feel comfortable. I tried to get her interested in all the usual things I've done in the past, things like coloring, playing with Play-Doh, and of course, I had toys. But Marcy seemed disinterested in all of these things, and barely participated. The kids I had before were younger than her, so I tried a different approach. I painted her fingernails and braided her hair, and even applied a little pink lip gloss and light blush to her face. When I was done, she glanced in the hand mirror I held up, then just left to go sit on the floor by the TV and stared at me until I turned it on for her. I was the only thing that held her attention, so I put on a fun educational show made for toddlers that taught basic things like sight words and social skills. I don't think her mother let her watch TV at all before, if they even owned one. I had a cat named Socks that seemed to be a hit with the children before, but Marcy acted terrified of her. So I moved her cat box and food bowl into my bedroom the day Marcy had arrived, and that's where she stayed until she went missing the night of day 3. I left my bedroom window cracked just enough so that she could traverse the fenced yard when she pleased. She was fixed and had never attempted to run away before. I was devastated, but tried to just focus my attention and energy on Marcy. Marcy was extremely picky about food. She wouldn't touch anything I home cooked. She looked at it with a disgusting expression and requested one thing: crackers. I didn't currently have any crackers at home, so I tried some frozen meals such as pizza, chicken nuggets, and kids' meals. She would hardly taste the food, moving it around on her plate. Every once in a while, she would fork a tiny bit into her mouth, make a face, and say the same thing: crackers. She literally only ate enough to sustain life the first 2 days, so I called a friend and asked if they would bring over some saltines for me the next day. There was one other thing that seemed to hold her attention. Even though she didn't like the food I made for her, Marcy seemed to enjoy watching me cook for myself. Crackers? She seemed to question as she looked from the raw chicken I had removed from the fridge. I calmly explained that no, it wasn't crackers I was preparing. It was chicken, and she was welcome to have some after I cooked it. I threw it in the heated pan on the stove and started to sizzle. She lost interest and wandered into the living room. That night, something weird happened. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke having to pee, and when I sat up in bed, I saw Marcy peering at me through the crack in my door. It startled me, and to be honest, it was a bit creepy. It didn't have the feeling of a child scared at night coming for help from an adult. It was more like she was watching me sleep. I got up and steered her back to her own room, tucked her in, and explained to her there was a rule about wandering the house at night. She should only get out of bed to use the restroom, and if she needed me, to call for me. She nodded and laid down. As I was leaving, I turned to glance at her, and her eyes were wide. She didn't look sleepy at all. She just lay there, staring at the door. The next day, my friend delivered the crackers, and I presented them to Marcy, expecting her to gobble them down. Instead, she took one, nibbled a little bit, and looked at me. "Crackers," she said. I agreed with her. Yes, crackers. Just what she wanted. Wasn't she happy with her snack? "Crackers," she said, and she set the half-eaten saltine on the table and went over to the TV and sat down. Okay, well, maybe she wanted a different kind. Saltines were kind of bland. I called my friend again and explained the situation. I asked if she would just get a variety of crackers and bring them over the next day. She agreed that she would. Of course, Marcy didn't eat much that night for dinner and went to her room early. I let her be. Sometimes these kids need a little space after what they have been through. I worked on my computer for several hours before getting myself ready for bed. I went to check on Marcy to make sure she had brushed her teeth, and when I walked into her room, she quickly jumped and hit something in her bed. I knelt down, explaining she didn't have to hide things from me. I was there to help her, and we should be very open and honest with each other. I promised I wouldn't be mad, as I felt under her bed for the object. I was still explaining to her about honesty when I pulled the kitchen knife out from under her bed. I choked on my words. I nervously asked her why she had it. Of course she didn't answer me, only stared. I told her this was extremely dangerous and against the rules. I explained she could accidentally hurt herself, and she was never to touch knives in this house. She just looked at it and then looked back at me, saying nothing. I had a hard time falling asleep that night, and I thought I heard footsteps running down the hallway, but when I got up to check, Marcy was in her bed. She wasn't asleep. I asked her if she had been out of bed, and she quickly replied no. I said I was going back to bed, and she closed her eyes and tried to get some sleep. No. I smiled at this and just told her fine, but don't get up for anything but the restroom. She didn't reply, so I pulled the door shut and went back to my own bed. As I started to drift off, I swear I could hear footsteps in the hall. The next day, my friend dropped off 2 grocery bags full of all sorts of different crackers. There were Ritz crackers, goldfish crackers, even flavored saltines. I presented these to Marcy without success. She nibbled a little of each type, then looked at me. "Crackers," she said, a little louder than usual. I dug into a different bag and pulled out some of those little sandwich crackers. These were peanut butter and jelly. I showed them to her, and she shook her head. I found some that were cheese. She didn't want those either. I tried Triscuits, then chicken biscuits. She just looked at them and walked over to the TV, sat down, and stared at me. I was growing increasingly frustrated. I let her watch some shows while I worked on my computer. Every once in a while, I would hear her mutter along with the learning program she watched, but her expression never changed. She never once smiled. That night, I tucked her into bed and went to take a shower. I took my time getting dressed for bed, and when I was done, I went down the hall to check on her. She was on her bed. I called out for her while searching the room. She did not reply. Before I left her room, I stopped and turned towards her bed. I knelt down and looked from where I was standing at the door. Maurice was not there, but I could see something. I walked over and reached for it without looking, and cried out when my fingers touched something. I pulled my hand away and looked at it. It looked like blood, but it had started to dry and turned sticky. My heart racing, I quickly headed towards the living room to grab my phone. When I entered, I was shocked to find I had been turned upside down. The cushions were all pulled from the couch and thrown around the room. Books had been pulled from shelves and dropped on the floor. My knickknacks had been thrown out from the front door, which hung ajar. I stepped out to call for Marcy. I got no response and saw no one. Now I was mad and worried. I quickly checked for her in the kitchen and she wasn't there, so I only left my room. I sprinted down the hall and into my bedroom. It was in the same state as the living room had been in. My things were all over the floor, my dresser drawers were open, and the clothes had been halfway pulled out. The comforter and sheets had been ripped from my bed and tossed crumpled into the corner. I was furious as I sat on my bed to take a minute to decide what my next course of action should be. I sighed deeply and put my head in my hands. Should I call the police first, or a caseworker? Then I heard a giggle. It seemed to come from behind me. I turned slowly to look, but there was nothing there. I heard it again, not behind me, under the bed. I got on my hands and knees and pulled up the dust ruffle to look. Marcy was under my bed, clutching the same kitchen knife I had taken from her a few nights ago. She was finally smiling. I stood up and demanded she come out right now. She did. I carefully took the knife from her. She let me. She had wet herself. I went back to my room and immediately called Mr. Dennis. He didn't pick up, so I tried again. When he still didn't answer, I texted him that he had to come and get Marcy first thing in the morning. A few minutes later, he called back. I explained to him what had just happened, and he agreed this was abnormal and potentially dangerous. He advised me to keep my bedroom door locked tonight, and he would be here early in the morning to collect her. We chatted a little more about her strange behavior the past few days, and before we hung up, I mentioned her eating habits. I told him about the fact that she had repeatedly requested crackers to eat, but when I got them for her, she didn't want them. That's a weird coincidence, he chuckled. Crackers was the name of her mother's parrot. I thanked him and hung up. I'm sitting here now writing this, and I can't stop thinking about when he said they had found her covered in feathers. I'm writing here now, writing this, and I can't stop thinking about when he said they had found her covered in feathers, and the fact there was no food anywhere. I'm actually scared. I can hear her footsteps running up to my bedroom door. She waits here for a moment before I hear her move away again. Then she comes back again. I won't be sleeping tonight. The morning can't come soon enough.